The fantasy playoffs are just around the corner. In this video, I'm going to exclusively go over players that you should be targeting at the quarterback position as streaming options, and even consider some running backs that could be great stashes if anything were to happen to the RB1s within those respective offenses. Sometimes the key to success in fantasy football is just understanding the matchups and how you can leverage it to your advantage. And the first player I'm going to be sharing for this example as a streaming option at the quarterback position is going to be Geno Smith out of the Seattle Seahawks. For starters, Geno is actually available in 53.5% of ESPN leagues, so he can be someone that you can stash in the meantime. And the reason why for me Geno is a strong option as a streamer at the quarterback position is because of the matchup he has with the New York Jets. Despite New York being a pretty strong secondary for the most part, they've actually been had when it comes to big plays. They actually are in the bottom half of the league in allowing 40-yard plus plays in the passing games. And the thing is, Geno Smith actually is quite strong in this area as well. When you look at his stats right here, he's currently 7th in true completion percentage. He's 4th in deep ball accuracy, and he's also 10th in deep ball completion percentage. Again, even though the Jets are a pretty good defense, in the last 5 of 6 games have actually allowed 23 plus fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. All these reasons for me make Geno a very strong streaming option for your rosters in week 13. Now, another one I want to share with you is going to be Byrce Young out of the Carolina Panthers. He's currently rostered in 3.8% of ESPN leagues. He's actually coming off his best performance of the season. One could even argue best performance of his career. He finished with 263 passing yards, had 1 touchdown, also had 3 carries for 20 yards. He finished as the QB 14 with 16.5 fantasy points. Nothing that's going to wow you, but I myself felt really encouraged after what I saw this past week. And in week 13, he has an even better matchup. He faces the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who actually allow the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks. Plus, you also combine that with the overall confidence that you're seeing Byrce Young operate in. It would not surprise me if you saw him put out a great fantasy football performance in week 13. And to take it one step further, Byrce Young's playoff schedule is actually pretty favorable as well. When you look at this, he actually faces the Dallas Cowboys in week 15, who actually allow the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Then he sees Tampa Bay on championship week 17, and they allow the 2nd most points to opposing quarterbacks. And if for whatever reason your championship week goes into week 18, Atlanta also allows the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks. So not only can he be a streaming option this upcoming week, but he can also be an option to consider as we get into the fantasy playoffs as well. Hey, I have one more quarterback to review as a strong streaming option for the playoffs, and I also have 2 other RBs that you're not going to want to miss out on. But before we do so, most of you aren't already subscribed, so do me a solid. If you're getting value, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Let's go over these last few players. And this next player is going to be quarterback Levis from the Tennessee Titans. Currently, he's rostered in 4.7% of ESPN rosters. He's actually coming off back-to-back games with 270 plus passing yards, and he's going to be facing the Washington Commanders, who actually allow the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And this is a Commanders defense that also has given up 20 plus fantasy points in 4 straight games to these quarterbacks as well. And this from X, we got this from Anthony Servino. He shares how since week 10 we have seen Levis average 21.5 fantasy points per game while averaging 249.3 passing yards. Also has been the QB 12 with a 9.6 yards per attempt. He's been very efficient, very consistent, and not only that, but his playoff schedule gets really juicy. In week 14, he faces the Jacksonville Jaguars, who allow the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. He faces Cincinnati in week 15, who allow the 5th most, and then he also faces Indianapolis, who allow the 13th most points, while putting a ball in it on week 17, facing those same Jacksonville Jaguars, who I just mentioned allow the most points to opposing quarterbacks. All right, now that we've gone over some quarterbacks, here are 2 extra players I'm going to be sharing. They're going to be 2 running backs that are going to be considered valuable stashes. Now that we're getting into the playoffs, it's really important that you construct your roster very differently. And what I mean specifically is how you have your bench set up. And now that we have most of the bye weeks already in the rearview mirror, what you're going to want to do is I'm going to need you to empty out your bench as far as players that you know you're not going to be able to play, whether it could be players that are wide receiver options or even tight ends that you know aren't going to get as much playing time. And what I mean specifically is if you have your tight end stud already locked in, like a McBride, or you feel good with like maybe even a Zach Ertz, you feel happy with him being your tight end going forward, and there's no other better option, drop that backup tight end. If you feel like your wide receiver core is already set, of course, barring any serious injuries, by all means, drop any of those bench wide receivers that you're not going to be using and replace them with strong handcuffs. And the two that I'm going to be sharing, the first one is going to be Trey Benson out of the Arizona Cardinals. I have been high on this kid from the jump. He's currently only rostered in 24.2% of ESPN rosters, so he can be had right now. And we've been seeing an uptick within this offense as far as getting him touches, and this is not uncharacteristic of a team doing this with the rookie running back. We saw in week 9 he saw 9 touches. In week 10 he saw a season high 12 touches, and in week 11 he came back down to earth. He only had 4 touches in that game, but James Conner also only had 7 carries and was able to salvage his day with having 5 targets in the passing game. But this was a very ugly game for Arizona before their bye, and when you see this screenshot here, you can see the uptick on how you've been seeing Arizona feature Benson more and how it's been taken away from James Conner. And again, everything boils down to how effective Arizona has been as far as their running game and how this can be actually favorable, especially considering that the playoffs get really juicy as far as your schedule goes in fantasy. Because in week 15, the Arizona Cardinals faced the New England Patriots, who allow the 11th most points to opposing running backs. Then in week 16, Carolina, who allow the most points in that same category. And then you finally couple it with the week 17 matchup versus the LA Rams, who allow the 8th most points in that same category of points allowed to opposing running backs. And I've established this many times. If anything was to, God forbid, happen to James Conner, Benson has that RB1 upside that can win you a championship in fantasy football. So be sure to stash him now in the hopes that he can come through for you later on. And this last player probably is the most important one of the whole video. That's going to be Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. Currently, he's rostered in 50.8% of ESPN rosters, and the key for me is that he has shown he can be a strong RB1. And when you look at what he's done in the past, this is what he's done actually in his career, filling in as the RB1 for the Seattle Seahawks. He's averaged 17.6 points per game, filling in for Kenneth Walker. And in his career with Kenneth Walker, you can see the huge discrepancy, 5.9 points in those games where he has played with Kenneth Walker along his side. Now, I want to show you this other screenshot, very small sample size, but it's one of this season in 2024, where you saw the 2 games where Kenneth Walker was actually out and Zach Charbonnet filled in. Zach Charbonnet saw 21.8 points in this offense in fantasy football versus 6.3, so uptick in both categories. So if anything was to happen to Kenneth Walker, we know that Zach Charbonnet is not only going to get the usage, but he can be very effective in that role as well. And another reason why you should be targeting him is because of the schedule down the stretch. And week 13, week 14, and week 16, he has relatively tough matchups versus New York, versus Arizona, versus also Minnesota. However, both Minnesota and Arizona can be had because they are middle of the pack when it comes to how they defend running backs that can also receive. And for me, the key is going to be championship week in week 17. The Seattle Seahawks play the Chicago Bears, who actually allow the 13th most points to opposing running backs. And if your league goes to a week 18 championship, the Rams do play the Seattle Seahawks, who actually allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Hey, you made it to the very end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. As we get ready for the fantasy playoffs, a lot of the videos that I'm going to be doing are going to be catered to how to prepare your team for the fantasy football playoffs, as well as we come to the very end, I'm going to be sharing some more content for you dynasty fantasy football players. So if you have any suggestions on videos or things that you would like me to continue to go over, by all means add that in the comments. And if you're getting value, do me a solid, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and also check out some of these other videos that I have here on the channel that'll help you out as we get ready for the fantasy football postseason. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care. God bless. Peace.